Letter number 8 of the Silence Dogood letters by Benjamin Franklin.
This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
To the author of the New-England Courant. Sir, I prefer the following abstract from the London Journal to anything of my own, and therefore shall present it to your readers this week without any further preface. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty. Without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man, as far as by it he does not hurt or control the right of another, and this is the only check it ought to suffer, and the only bounds it ought to know. This sacred privilege is so essential to free governments that the security of property and the freedom of speech always go together, and in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors. This secret was so well known to the court of King Charles I that his wicked ministry procured a proclamation to forbid the people to talk of parliaments, which those traitors had laid aside. To assert the undoubted right of the subject, and defend his Majesty's legal prerogative, was called disaffection, and punished as sedition. Nay, people were forbid to talk of religion in their families, for the priests had combined with the ministers to cook up tyranny and suppress truth and the law, while the late King James, when Duke of York, went avowedly to mass, men were fined, imprisoned, and undone for saying he was a papist, and that King Charles II might live more securely a papist, there was an act of Parliament made, declaring it treason to say that he was one. That men ought to speak well of their governors is true, while their governors deserve to be well spoken of, but to do public mischief without hearing of it is only the prerogative and felicity of tyranny. A free people will be showing that they are so by their freedom of speech. The administration of government is nothing else but the attendance of the trustees of the people upon the interest and affairs of the people, and as it is the part and business of the people, for whose sake alone all public matters are or ought to be transacted, to see whether they be well or ill transacted, so it is the interest, and ought to be the ambition, of all honest magistrates, to have their deeds openly examined and publicly scanned. Only the wicked governors of men dread what is said of them. Audavit Tiberius probra quies lacerabitur atque perculsus est. The public censure was true, else he had not felt it bitter. Freedom of speech is ever the symptom, as well as the effect of a good government. In old Rome, all was left to the judgment and pleasure of the people, who examined the public proceedings with such discretion and censured those who administered them with such equity and mildness, that in the space of 300 years not 5 public ministers suffered unjustly. Indeed, whenever the commons proceeded to violence, the great ones had been the aggressors. Guilt only dreads liberty of speech, which drags it out of its lurking holes, and exposes its deformity and horror to daylight. Horatius, Valerius, Cincinnatus, and other virtuous and undesigning magistrates of the Roman Commonwealth had nothing to fear from liberty of speech. Their virtuous administration, the more it was examined, the more it brightened and gained by inquiry. When Valerius in particular was accused upon some slight grounds of affecting the diadem, he, who was the first minister of Rome, does not accuse the people for examining his conduct, but approved his innocence in a speech to them, and gave such satisfaction to them, and gained such popularity to himself, that they gave him a new name, inde cognomen factum publicole est, to denote that he was their favorite and their friend. Late deinde legis ante omnes de provocatione adversus magistratus ad populum levi lib. 2 Cap. 8. But things afterwards took another turn. Rome, with the loss of its liberty, lost also its freedom of speech. Then men's words began to be feared and watched, and then first began the poisonous race of informers, banished indeed under the righteous administration of Titus, Nerva, Trajan, Aurelius, etc., but encouraged and enriched under the vile ministry of Sejanus, Tigellinus, Pallas, and Cleander. Quaelibet, quod in secreta nostra non inquirant principes, nisi quos odimos, says Pliny to Trajan. The best princes have ever encouraged and promoted freedom of speech. They know that upright measures would defend themselves, and that all upright men would defend them. Tacitus, speaking of the reign of some of the princes above mentioned, says with ecstasy, Rara temporum felicitaet ubi sentire quae velis and quae sentius decere licet. A blessed time when you might think what you would, and speak what you thought. I doubt not but old Spencer and his son, who were the chief ministers and praetors of Edward II., would have been very glad to have stopped the mouths of all the honest men in England. They dreaded to be called traitors, because they were traitors, and I dare say Queen Elizabeth Walsingham, who deserved no reproaches, feared none. Misrepresentation of public measures is easily overthrown by representing public measures truly. When they are honest, they ought to be publicly known, that they may be publicly commended, but if they are knavish or pernicious, they ought to be publicly exposed, in order to be publicly detested. Yours, etc., Silence Dogood. The New England Courant, July 9th, 1722. End of letter number 8 of the Silence Dogood letters.